There's a moment when you realize that everything you've been taught about power is a lie. It happens quietly, usually in the middle of an ordinary day when someone tries to diminish you and something inside refuses to bend. In that moment, you glimpse what you could become. Not the loud, desperate thing that most people mistake for strength, but something else entirely. Something that doesn't need to announce itself because it simply is. The ancient masters understood this. They knew that true power operates in the spaces between words, in the pregnant pause before action, in the controlled stillness that makes others lean forward to catch your whisper. They knew that the strongest fortresses are built not from stone, but from silence. But here's what they didn't tell you, what no self-help guru or motivational speaker will ever admit. The path to becoming untouchable requires you to first become unrecognizable to yourself. It demands that you shed not just your weaknesses, but your very need to be understood, accepted, or even liked. It's a metamorphosis that happens in the dark, where only you can witness your own transformation from prey to predator. The foundation of this transformation rests on 5 pillars, each more demanding than the last. The first is silence, but not the empty quiet of the weak or confused. This is the deliberate, weighted silence of someone who has learned that words are weapons too precious to waste on target practice. When Marcus Aurelius wrote about the power of restraint, he understood that every word you don't speak is ammunition saved for when it matters most. Picture this scenario. You're in a meeting, and someone challenges your competence directly in front of the team. The room goes quiet. Everyone expects you to defend yourself, to explain, to justify. Instead, you lean back slightly, maintain eye contact for exactly 3 seconds, then simply say, "Continue." The challenger stumbles, suddenly unsure. They expected resistance, argument, emotional reaction. What they got was a mountain's response to wind. 2 words delivered with the weight of absolute certainty, and the dynamic has shifted completely. You've just demonstrated that their opinion requires no response because it carries no weight in your reality. This is the first lesson of untouchability. You don't argue with your inferiors. You acknowledge them the way a king acknowledges a court jester, with benevolent indifference. The moment you engage in their framework, you've accepted their premise that you need to prove something to them. The untouchable operates from a different premise entirely, that their worth is self-evident and requires no external validation. But silence alone is just the beginning. The second pillar is patience, not as a virtue, but as a weapon. Machiavelli observed that he who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner effects his ruin than his preservation. The untouchable understands this deeply. They see 10 moves ahead while others are still celebrating their last small victory. Consider the colleague who consistently takes credit for your ideas. The common response is immediate confrontation, public embarrassment, defensive maneuvering. The patient predator takes a different approach. They begin documenting everything. They start CCing key stakeholders on emails. They wait for the perfect moment when this person makes a crucial error, then they strike with devastating precision. Not emotional revenge, but surgical correction. The thief finds themselves exposed not as your enemy, but as incompetent in front of people who matter. The lesson is learned by everyone watching. Crossing you has consequences that arrive when you least expect them. This kind of patience requires rewiring your emotional responses. Most people seek immediate gratification from conflict, the quick hit of righteous anger or defensive victory. The untouchable has learned to find pleasure in the long game, in watching their carefully laid plans unfold like a time-lapse flower blooming. They understand that the most satisfying victories are the ones your opponents don't even realize they've lost until it's far too late to recover. The third pillar is discipline. but not the kind that builds muscles or improves test scores. This is the discipline of selective engagement, of calculated responses, of emotional regulation so complete that it becomes invisible. When someone attempts to provoke you, whether through insult, manipulation, or challenge, your response is never reactive. It's always chosen. Here's how this looks in practice. Someone posts something designed to bait you on social media, perhaps a subtle dig or a passive-aggressive comment meant to draw you into public drama. The undisciplined person takes the bait immediately, defending themselves or counterattacking, feeding the cycle of attention and validation that the original poster craved. The disciplined respond differently. If they respond at all, it might be days later, with something so brief and devastating that it ends the conversation permanently. More often, they don't respond at all, understanding that some battles are won by never showing up to fight. A friend once told me about watching a master chess player at a tournament. His opponent tried various psychological tactics, taking too long between moves, making dismissive sounds, even mild trash talk between games. The master's response to all of it was identical. Complete focus on the board, as if his opponent's behavior was happening in another dimension entirely. He won not just because he was better at chess, but because he refused to play any game except the one that mattered. This is discipline transcended into art. The untouchable develops this same quality across all interactions. They become immune to manipulation because they've trained themselves to recognize and dismiss it automatically. They don't get drawn into others' emotional states because they've learned to maintain their own internal weather regardless of external storms. This isn't coldness, it's sovereignty. Which brings us to the fourth pillar, detachment. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of untouchability. People confuse it with not caring, with emotional numbness or social isolation. In reality, detachment is the ability to care about outcomes without being controlled by them, to engage fully while holding lightly to results. The attached person's happiness depends on specific outcomes occurring. They need the promotion, the relationship, the validation, the victory. This need makes them vulnerable because others can manipulate them by threatening these outcomes. The detached person wants these things but doesn't need them. They pursue goals with full intensity while remaining fundamentally unshakable regardless of results. Imagine you're in a relationship where your partner threatens to leave during every argument, using your attachment to them as leverage for control. The attached person becomes increasingly desperate, agreeing to unreasonable demands to prevent abandonment. The detached person responds with calm clarity. I love you and want you to stay, but I'll be fine either way. Do what makes you happy. This response is devastating to manipulators because it removes their primary weapon while demonstrating that your sense of self isn't dependent on their presence. This detachment extends to all areas. Your career success doesn't define your worth. Others' opinions don't determine your value. External validation becomes pleasant but unnecessary. You begin to operate from a place of internal abundance rather than external scarcity, and this shift is visible to everyone around you. It changes how people treat you because it changes how you treat yourself. But here's where this transcends simple self-improvement philosophy and becomes something darker, more powerful, more dangerous. The fifth pillar is legacy construction. And this is where the untouchable begins to play a game that most people don't even know exists. Legacy isn't what happens after you die. Legacy is what people say about you when you're not in the room. It's the stories they tell about you, the reputation that precedes you, the invisible force field of respect and fear that surrounds your name. The untouchable doesn't wait for history to write their story. They become the author of their own mythology while they're still alive to enjoy it. This begins with strategic positioning. You don't just do good work, you make sure the right people know about it in the right way. You don't just solve problems, you solve them in ways that become legendary within your circles. You don't just stand up for yourself. You do it so memorably that it becomes a cautionary tale others reference years later. Remember the story of the corporate whistleblower who brought down an entire corrupt leadership team? The untouchable version of that story isn't someone who desperately reports wrongdoing and hopes for protection. It's someone who methodically documents everything, builds an unassailable case, forms strategic alliances, then chooses the perfect moment to detonate the bomb they've been carefully constructing. When the dust settles, they're not the victim who got lucky. They're the architect of justice who planned every detail. These 5 pillars work together to create something unprecedented, a human being who cannot be broken because they've removed all the handles others typically use to manipulate them. They can't be bought because they're not desperate for money. They can't be threatened because they're not attached to specific outcomes. They can't be manipulated because they see through the tactics. They can't be intimidated because they've faced their own darkness and found it manageable. The transformation this creates is subtle but unmistakable. When you walk into a room, conversations shift. Not because you're loud or demanding attention, but because your presence carries weight. People instinctively sense that you're operating from different principles than they are, that the usual social games don't apply to you. Some find this inspiring, others find it threatening. Both reactions serve your purposes. Here's exactly how this manifests in daily interactions. Someone tries to interrupt you during a presentation. Instead of raising your voice or competing for attention, you simply stop speaking and look at them. Complete silence for 4 seconds. Everyone turns to see what you're looking at. The interrupter realizes they've made an error and apologizes. You nod once, acknowledge their apology with "thank you," pause another 2 seconds, then continue exactly where you left off. The entire room has just learned something about your boundaries without you saying a word about them. Or consider this. A friend consistently cancels plans at the last minute. The usual response is to express frustration, make accusations, or gradually distance yourself while harboring resentment. The untouchable handles it differently. The next time they cancel, your response is, "I understand, I'll make other plans." No guilt trip, no emotional manipulation, no drama. But there are consequences. Future invitations become less frequent. You become less available when they want to make plans. You don't announce this policy, you simply implement it. Eventually they either adjust their behavior or fade from your circle. Either outcome is acceptable to you. This is the power of natural consequences delivered without emotional charge. You're not punishing people, you're simply responding to their revealed priorities with appropriate adjustments to your own behavior. It's devastating in its simplicity because it's impossible to argue with or manipulate around. In romantic relationships, this becomes even more potent. Your partner knows that you choose to be with them rather than needing to be with them. This knowledge creates a completely different dynamic than relationships built on desperation or codependence. They can't control you through withdrawal of affection because your emotional state isn't dependent on their approval. They can't manipulate you through threats to leave because you've genuinely accepted that possibility and planned for it. This doesn't make you cold or unloving, it makes you genuinely chooseful. Every day you stay is a conscious decision rather than a desperate cling to security. This awareness changes everything about how both of you behave. Gratitude replaces entitlement. Effort replaces complacency. The relationship improves not because you're trying harder, but because you've removed the toxic foundation of fear and dependency that poisons most connections. But the most profound change happens in how you handle direct attacks on your character or competence. The untouchable has developed what I call the mirror response. When someone accuses you of being arrogant, your response isn't defensive explanation or counterattack. It's a slight smile and the words, "I can see how my confidence might appear that way to you." You've acknowledged their perception without accepting their judgment, demonstrated understanding without apologizing, and subtly indicated that their interpretation reveals more about them than about you. When someone questions your qualifications in front of a group, you don't recite your resume or defend your experience. You say, "What specific outcome are you looking for?" This immediately shifts the conversation from your credentials to their actual needs, positioning you as someone focused on solutions rather than status. It also forces them to either articulate a legitimate concern or reveal that they're simply trying to undermine you without cause. The psychological effect of these responses is profound. Your attackers expected emotional reaction, defensive behavior, or engagement in their chosen battleground. Instead, they encounter something they're not prepared for. Someone who refuses to accept the premise that they need to prove themselves to anyone. This refusal is so calm and complete that it often leaves them speechless. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. But the truly untouchable discover a third option: to be inevitable. When people encounter you, they sense that you're not someone who can be deterred, discouraged, or destroyed by conventional means. You're not trying to be feared or loved. You simply are what you are, and you'll continue being that regardless of their opinion about it. This inevitability creates a unique form of respect that transcends both fear and affection. People might not understand you, but they recognize that you're operating from principles deeper than social convenience or emotional neediness. They sense that crossing you wouldn't just be unwise, it would be pointless, like arguing with gravity or negotiating with mathematics. The process of developing this presence requires you to confront the deepest truth about human nature. Most people are controlled by their need for approval, security, and emotional validation. These needs make them predictable, manipulable, and ultimately powerless. The untouchable has systematically removed these vulnerabilities through the 5 pillars, creating a fortress of self that cannot be breached by external forces. But here's where it gets truly dangerous, where this philosophy transcends self-help and becomes something that could reshape the world around you. The untouchable doesn't just protect themselves from manipulation, they become capable of seeing through everyone else's motivations with crystalline clarity. When you're no longer driven by the same needs that control others, you can observe those needs in action without being blinded by them. You begin to see the hidden power structures in every interaction. The person who always needs to be right is revealing their intellectual insecurity. The one who constantly seeks attention is broadcasting their emotional emptiness. The micromanager is demonstrating their fear of irrelevance. Once you see these patterns clearly, you can predict behavior with stunning accuracy. This clarity becomes a form of social superpower. In negotiations, you know exactly which buttons to press and which to leave alone. In conflicts, you can de-escalate or intensify with surgical precision. In leadership situations, you can motivate different personality types by appealing to their specific psychological needs. You become someone who understands the game of human interaction at a level that most people don't even realize exists. Consider how this plays out in a high-stakes business negotiation. Your counterpart is trying various tactics: artificial scarcity, Emotional manipulation appeals to your ego, threats to walk away. Because you've developed genuine detachment from the outcome, you can see these tactics clearly rather than being affected by them. You respond to each one with calm professionalism, never taking the bait, always steering back to the actual substance of the deal. Your counterpart becomes increasingly frustrated as their usual tools fail to work on you. Eventually, they make a mistake, revealing their true position or their actual deadline pressure. You capitalize on this information not aggressively, but with the quiet efficiency of someone who recognizes opportunity when it presents itself. You get better terms, not because you were ruthless, but because you remained clear-headed while they became emotional. This is the point where many people become uncomfortable with this philosophy. They sense that it could be used for manipulation or exploitation. They're right. The same tools that protect you from being controlled can be used to control others. The same clarity that helps you see through manipulation can enable you to manipulate more effectively. The same detachment that keeps you safe can make you dangerous to those who remain attached. This is where Machiavelli's deeper insights become relevant. He understood that power exists whether we acknowledge it or not, and that pretending otherwise doesn't eliminate power dynamics. It just ensures that you'll be subject to them rather than directing them. The choice isn't between power and powerlessness. It's between conscious engagement with power and unconscious subjugation to it. The untouchable makes this choice consciously. They don't seek power for its own sake, but they refuse to remain voluntarily powerless in a world where power determines outcomes. They develop strength not to dominate others, but to prevent others from dominating them. They cultivate influence not to manipulate, but to ensure that their voice carries weight when it matters most. This distinction is crucial because it determines whether this transformation leads to wisdom or corruption. The person who seeks untouchability for revenge, control, or ego gratification will eventually be corrupted by their own power. They'll become the very thing they originally sought to defend against, a manipulator who uses others' vulnerabilities against them. But the person who seeks untouchability for protection, effectiveness, and authentic self-expression discovers something remarkable. They find that true power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. When you no longer need others' approval, you can finally be honest with them. When you're not desperate for specific outcomes, you can pursue what actually matters to you. When you're not afraid of conflict, you can address problems directly instead of letting them fester. The untouchable becomes more authentic, not less. They say what they mean because they're not afraid of the consequences. They pursue what they want because they're not paralyzed by the possibility of failure. They form genuine connections because they're not performing a character designed to please others. Paradoxically, removing the need for others' approval makes it easier to earn genuine respect. This is where the transformation becomes irreversible. Once you've experienced the freedom of operating without constant fear of judgment, criticism, or abandonment, you can never go back to the anxious, approval-seeking version of yourself. It's like learning to see color after a lifetime of black and white vision. The old way of being becomes not just unappealing, but literally unimaginable. People around you will notice this change before you do. They'll comment that you seem different, more confident, more centered. Some will be attracted to this energy, others will be threatened by it. Both reactions tell you that the transformation is working. You're no longer blending into the background of ordinary human neediness. You've become someone who stands out, not through performance or attention-seeking, but through authentic presence. This presence becomes your signature in the world. You don't announce your arrival. People simply know when you're in the room. You don't demand respect. It's offered automatically. You don't seek influence. It accumulates naturally around your demonstrated competence and unshakable center. The 5 pillars have done their work. Silence has taught you to speak only when your words can improve the situation. Patience has given you the ability to wait for the right moment rather than reacting impulsively. Discipline has made your responses conscious choices rather than emotional reflexes. Detachment has freed you from the desperate need for specific outcomes. Legacy construction has given you a reputation that precedes you and protects you. Together, these create something unprecedented in most people's experience, a human being who is genuinely self-possessed. Not the brittle, defensive pseudo-confidence that most people mistake for strength, but the quiet, unshakable certainty of someone who knows their own value and doesn't need external confirmation of it. This is where the philosophy transcends personal development and becomes something approaching enlightenment. The untouchable has solved the fundamental problem of human existence: how to remain authentic and effective in a world that constantly pressures you to compromise both. They've found the narrow path between becoming a victim of others' manipulation and becoming a manipulator themselves. They've learned to be kind without being weak, strong without being cruel, confident without being arrogant, detached without being cold. These seeming contradictions resolve into a form of human maturity so rare that most people have never encountered it firsthand. When they do encounter it, they recognize immediately that they're in the presence of something extraordinary. The untouchable doesn't need to announce their strength because it's evident in every interaction. They don't need to defend their worth because they've removed all doubt about it from their own mind first. They don't need to control others because they've achieved complete control over themselves. They don't need to win every battle because they've already won the war against their own limitations. This is the final stage of the transformation. You stop trying to become untouchable and simply realize that you already are. The protection you've built isn't armor you put on. It's strength you've developed from within. The power you wield isn't a tool you pick up. It's a natural expression of who you've become. The respect you command isn't something you demand. It's something people offer because they recognize excellence when they encounter it. You've become inevitable, not because you force yourself on the world, but because you've removed everything that could be forced from your personality. What remains is irreducible, essential, true. This core self cannot be manipulated because it has no handles for others to grab. It cannot be broken because it has been tested and refined in the fire of conscious self-development. The world belongs to the strong, but not the strength most people imagine. Not the loud, aggressive strength that announces itself and demands submission. The quiet, unshakable strength that needs no announcement because it speaks for itself. The strength that creates safety for others rather than threatening them. The strength that builds rather than destroys, that protects rather than dominates, that inspires rather than intimidates. This is what you become when you commit fully to the path of untouchability. Not a monster, but a master. Not a tyrant, but a force of nature. Not someone to be feared, but someone to be reckoned with. You've transcended the ordinary human condition of weakness disguised as strength and achieved the extraordinary condition of strength so complete it can afford to be gentle. And in that gentleness, in that quiet certainty, in that unshakable center, others find not threat but inspiration. They see what human beings are capable of becoming when they refuse to accept the limitations that society, circumstance, and their own fears try to impose. They see that transformation is possible, that strength can be developed, that untouchability is not a gift but an achievement. You've become proof that evolution doesn't end with biology, that humans can consciously direct their own development, that the person you were born as doesn't have to be the person you die as. You've shown that with enough courage, enough discipline, enough patience, anyone can build themselves into someone who cannot be diminished by external forces. This is your legacy, your gift to the world, living proof that untouchability is not just possible, but inevitable for anyone willing to pay the price. And that price, while demanding, is nothing compared to the cost of remaining vulnerable to every wind that blows, every opinion that's offered, every manipulation that's attempted. You've chosen the harder path, and in choosing it, you've become someone who can walk any path with confidence. You've built something that cannot be taken from you, developed something that cannot be diminished, achieved something that cannot be undone. You are untouchable. Not because you've armored yourself against the world, but because you've become too substantial to be moved by anything less than hurricane force. And even then, you bend without breaking. You remain rooted in principles deeper than circumstance, stronger than opinion, more enduring than any temporary storm. This is what it means to win the only war that matters, the war against your own limitations. Everything else is just weather.